Welcome to the Invite Health podcast, where our degreed healthcare professionals are excited to offer you the most important health and wellness information you need to make informed choices about your health. You can learn more about the products discussed in each of these episodes and all that Invite Health has to offer at www.invitehealth.com/podcast. First-time customers can use promo code podcast at checkout for an additional 15% off your first purchase. Let's get started.
Nsaids are extremely popular drugs. They're used every day by millions and millions of Americans. Now, they have a wide range of indications. That's why they're so popular, and they do work. They're typically used for arthritic joint pain, back pain, muscle pain, tendonitis, headaches, autoimmune disease management, like helping to manage rheumatoid arthritis or systemic lupus erythematosus, for fevers. Now, they do have many side effects and many toxicities, and these are frequently downplayed, and they shouldn't be. So that's going to be the topic of my very next episode, along with some safe and effective alternative therapies. However, arthritis drugs also deplete these nutrients, and this has consequences. I call them arthritis drugs because that's how they're most commonly used. They deplete folate, melatonin, zinc, and iron. And like I said, this will have consequences unless you replete these nutrients. So welcome to my episode, Your Arthritis Drug is Depleting These Important Nutrients. Hi, my name is Jerry Hickey. I'm a nutritional pharmacist. I'm also the senior scientific officer over here at Invite Health. Thank you for tuning in today to the Invite Health podcast. You can find all of our episodes for free wherever you listen to your podcast, or just visit invitehealth.com/podcast. Please subscribe and leave us a review. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Invite Health. The information on this episode is linked at the episode description, so I really want to get going here. So when you use these drugs, and I'll give you some of the more common versions of these drugs in just a second. When you use these drugs, they do deplete very important nutrients, and you may have to replete these, or you could face true consequences. So here's a short list of some NSAID drugs. Now, an NSAID stands for non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug. So it's not a hormone. The hormone anti-inflammatory drugs are even more powerful. They would be prednisone, Medrol dose pack, hydrocortisone. They're very powerful. So here's a list of NSAIDs. These are the common ones. Indomethacin, which is Indocin, that's a prescription. Sulindac, ibuprofen. So ibuprofen you could get in any pharmacy as Motrin, Advil, or Nuprin. Naproxen and naproxen sodium, so that would be Aleve or Naproxen or Anaprox. Diclofenac, that one's really dangerous. Diclofenac's very powerful for pain and inflammation, but it's really hard on the heart. That would be Voltaren as a prescription. Celecoxib, which is Celebrex. Aspirin. Aspirin is an NSAID. It means non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug. And diflunisol, which is Dolobit. So here are the nutrients it depletes, and I'll go in some sort of order because I'll tell you what these nutrients are responsible for. Folate. Now, folate stands for all the different forms of this very important B vitamin. It could be the synthetic folic acid used in most multivitamins. It could be methyl tetrahydrofolate. That is the active form of folate. That's the one we use in our multivitamins. It could be the folate found in vegetables. They call it folate because it's ubiquitous in foliage. But it's hard to get out of the plants. So even though you're going to find it in broccoli and spinach, you're not getting as much out of it as you would think you are. You need folate to create DNA. DNA is the base substance of all living things. And you need it for amino acid metabolism, such as for SAMe and homocysteine and methionine. And that's really important because you need this to create healthy tissue. So that makes folate very important during pregnancy, especially during the first trimester, the first 3 months of pregnancy, because the baby's developing a spine, a face, a brain. So without enough folate during pregnancy, the baby develops neural tubular defects, problems with the face, the spine, like they can have spina bifida. So it's really bad. It shows you how important it is for creating new tissue, that if you lack it, the baby can have birth defects. But you would also need it for healing, creating healthy tissue. Now, lacking it would have consequences, therefore, because you would need folate to properly create DNA, to properly create cells. So without it, there is an increased risk of not just birth defects in babies, but cancer. We'll get to that in another minute, because you would need folate for proper methylation. So let's discuss that. It's important. It's an important concept. In your chromosomes, women have 2 X chromosomes, men have an X and a Y chromosome. The DNA has to be protected from things like radiation and viruses, so it has to be properly methylated. And folate is at the top of the list that attaches to the DNA with proper methylation to prevent damage. If you're lacking folate, things like cigarette smoke or toxins from viruses, etc., can affect the DNA and it gets improperly methylated, and that can lead to cancer. So you actually need folate to prevent the first 2 steps in the cancer process, initiation and promotion. After that would be the cancerous tumor, and after that would be metastasis, the spread of the cancer. Of course, that's a simplification, but that's the basic 4 steps. So you would need the folate to help prevent damage from viruses, from bacteria, from toxins, from pollutants, from radiation. It's very important. From alcohol, from cigarette smoke. You also need folate to lower homocysteine, which is a byproduct of protein metabolism. If homocysteine goes too high, there are acceptable levels of homocysteine where it doesn't harm you. But if it goes too high, there's some evidence it damages the back of your eyes, and it could be related to age-related eye damage. There is some evidence that it damages the hip joint and the bone and can increase the risk of a hip fracture. But there's a lot of evidence that it can lead to Alzheimer's disease and also heart disease. So you want that folate to prevent an elevation of homocysteine. But you also need folate to create red blood cells. I'll tell you why. You need folate to create new tissue. The tissues inside your bone marrow are very high energy. They're very active. So very quickly you're making immune cells and platelets. Platelets are clotting cells. And you're making red blood cells. So you need enough folate because the bone marrow is creating these red blood cells so quickly that they're very susceptible to being damaged if you lack folate. And what you develop is megaloblastic anemia. Megaloblastic anemia comes from lacking folate. Typically, your red blood cells become too big. You're making fewer red blood cells and they get too big. Now, when they get to this larger size, they have a reduced oxygen carrying capacity. So you get fatigued, you get weak, you can have shortness of breath. And it's simple to treat, you just get folate. So when you're on these drugs all the time, which is not a good idea, we'll talk about that in our next episode when I talk about the side effects and toxicities of these drugs and why that can occur, and some really very functional replacements, alternative treatments for them, for arthritis, etc. When you use these drugs all the time, if they deplete folate, you can run into trouble. So it just makes sense. You could get folate in any multivitamin. But if you get a multivitamin like ours, you're actually getting the active form of folate, methyl tetrahydrofolate, because some people can't take the synthetic folic acid used in many multivitamins and convert it to the active form. So a lot of people are better off with the active form. A second nutrient, which is a hormone that these drugs like Advil and Aleve deplete your body of, is melatonin. Now, melatonin is known as a sleep hormone, and that's true. It sets the body up for sleep, but it does that in 2 ways. It lowers your body temperature, a good reason to open your window at night. Your body temperature drops like 3 or 4 degrees with melatonin, because if it doesn't, you can't sleep. You're uncomfortable. But the second thing it does, it lowers your nighttime blood pressure, and that's really important. It could drop your nighttime blood pressure 20-25%. Now, that's important. In the morning to wake up, the body, the adrenal glands that sit above your kidneys, they release epinephrine, which is also called adrenaline, and they release stress hormones, cortisol. And there's a reason for that. These squeeze your blood vessels and make your heart rate increase, so your blood pressure goes up, so more blood reaches your brain and your muscles, and they increase your blood sugar. The problem is, if your blood pressure didn't drop at night and it's elevated in the morning, that additional increase in blood pressure can lead to a heart attack or stroke. The most common time for a heart attack is when people first wake up in the morning. That's the number 1 time for a heart attack. So that nighttime decline in blood pressure is really important, and without melatonin, you're not getting that nighttime drop in blood pressure. You also need melatonin for the digestive tract. I tell people all the time with GERD, the gastroesophageal reflux disease, take some melatonin before bedtime, like a half an hour before bedtime. Because your digestive tract, melatonin is so important to the digestive tract that it releases melatonin for healing and for function. Melatonin, because of its effect on the immune system, helps prevent and helps fight cancer. There's studies coming out now that in certain cancers, in certain patients, melatonin may help fight the cancer. And if you lack melatonin, there seems to be a higher risk of certain cancers like prostate cancer in men and breast cancers in women. There's some evidence that you need melatonin at night so you don't have chronic pain in the daytime, because you're not supposed to be suffering with knee pain when you're sitting on the couch, right? But also you need melatonin for your internal clock, which we call your circadian rhythm. Your internal clock says, okay, it's nighttime, go to sleep. Okay, it's morning, wake up. Okay, it's breakfast time, it's lunchtime, it's dinner time. Okay, this is when you go to the bathroom to do this, and this is when you go to the bathroom to do that. This is your body temperature. This is bone building. This is the immune function. So when your internal clock is thrown off, it affects bone building, it accelerates aging, but it really affects your immune system. When you release melatonin at night, it kind of is healing and relaxing for the immune system. Your immune system goes through a period of healing at night. It's kind of like less active. It's regrouping. And this is important because when you're home in your own bed at night, you're not exposed to germs. But the next day when you get up and you go on a train or a bus, or you go to your office, you go shopping in a supermarket, or you go wherever you're going, you're mixing it up with people, you're exposed to the germs. So you need your immune system functioning in the daytime and regrouping at night. If you lack melatonin, your immune system becomes active in the nighttime when you don't really need it that much, and it's not protecting you in the daytime when you really need it. So you need melatonin for your immune system. Melatonin is so important to the immune system that your immune system can release melatonin so it functions properly. So in the old days, we thought melatonin was only released from this gland, kind of like in the middle of your brain called your pineal gland when it was getting darker to set you up for sleep. Now we know that your digestive tract and your immune cells can also release melatonin, showing you how important this hormone is. If you take these drugs like Advil, Aleve, Celebrex, diclofenac, etc., even aspirin, you can reduce your melatonin level. Now, it might be insidious. You might not relate it to the drug. So when you first take the drug, your melatonin might be okay. But then over the course of time, there might be less and less melatonin release. And eventually it's going to affect your sleeping and your health and your immune system, etc. And you're not going to know it's the drug. But on those drugs, you may need some melatonin. And the amount of melatonin needed from person to person varies wildly. Some people need a 0.5 milligram. Some people need 1 milligram. Some people need 3 milligram. Some people need 9, 10, 11, 12 milligrams. It varies from person to person. Period. I don't need it. End of story. I could sleep 7 hours, no problem. I just don't need melatonin, but a lot of people do. So besides the folate and the melatonin, these drugs, your Advil, your Aleve, your aspirin, can also deplete you of zinc. Now that's a problem. Your pancreas relies on zinc. Your pancreas releases enzymes to help digest your food. Some enzymes are released from a part of the small intestine called the duodenal wall, but other enzymes are released from the pancreas. If you even lack zinc a little bit, you're not digesting your food well because you're not going to release these enzymes like the chymotrypsin and the pepsin, etc. The pancreas also requires zinc to control your blood sugar. I'll give you a quick tutorial on that. When you're eating food, if you don't store away some of the sugar, you don't have sugar for later on when you're not eating for energy. Plus, excessive sugar in the blood can damage your organs and tissues. That's what happens in diabetics. So during a meal, the beta cells in your pancreas release insulin to store away some of the excess sugar. And then in between meals, your alpha cells release a second hormone, and this hormone called glucagon releases some of the stored sugar so you have a source of energy in between meals. To release the insulin and the glucagon to balance your blood sugar throughout the day, you have to have adequate zinc. You also need zinc for healing. I'll give you a quick tutorial on that. There's a dipeptide, meaning 2 amino acids, made out of beta-alanine and histidine, L-histidine, called carnosine. Carnosine does a lot of great things in the human body. But one of the things it does, it's needed to patch you up when you get a wound or a cut, or if you have surgery. It interacts with the mineral zinc to do this. It's kind of like a sewing machine knitting together your skin and your tissues. So if you lack zinc, the healing process is put off. You need zinc for keeping clean arteries, because zinc works as an antioxidant in your arteries to prevent heart disease. You need zinc to make SOD type 1 and SOD type 3. These are two powerful enzymatic antioxidants that protect your heart, protect your liver and kidneys, protect your pancreas, protect your brain, protect your eyes. As you grow older, by the way, zinc absorption declines. And if you're on these drugs, it'll further decline because these drugs are going to deplete you of zinc. And then you really have a problem because you can't protect your brain. Your sense of taste, your sense of smell, for hearing, for vision. Like without zinc, it's a lot easier to develop a cataract or age-related blindness, age-related macular degeneration. You need zinc for your thyroid function. So if you're on these drugs long-term, you better have a source of zinc because you have to have zinc to fight viruses and to fight cancer. In fact, if they could figure out a way of getting zinc into a cancer cell, they'll be able to kill most cancers. But the problem is cancer cells can protect themselves from zinc. But you need zinc for the immune system to fight off pneumonia, the flu, colds, COVID-19. Now, the other nutrient that these drugs deplete is iron. Now, the iron's very interesting. With iron, you create myoglobin. Myoglobin is the red stuff in your muscles. It allows the muscles to use oxygen, but it also breaks down into muscle nitric oxide, which stimulates energy production in your muscle. So you need iron for muscle function. You also need iron to create neuroglobin. Neuroglobin's in the brain. Neuroglobin supplies your brain cells with oxygen, but it also protects the brains during hypoxic events, hypoxic conditions. So what's a hypoxic condition? A lack of oxygen in the brain. It helps prevent the death of brain cells. So that could be a mini stroke or a stroke. Or you're swimming and you can't hold your breath anymore and you don't have enough oxygen. The neuroglobin made by the iron molecule feeds the brain oxygen and protects the brain. Hemoglobin. You need iron to make hemoglobin. I like to compare your red blood cells to a balloon. So balloons could be yellow and blue and orange and green on the outside. That would be your blood type. Okay, so if blood types had a color, that would be like the color of a balloon. But inside the balloon, it's all the same. And inside your red blood cell, it's all the same. It's red. That's the hemoglobin. That's a combination of things like tyrosine, protein, B12, folate, and iron. That's the hemoglobin. And the hemoglobin perfectly carries oxygen. So, I mean, that's really important. And it's because of the iron that it could do that. It's magnificent. Your heart is pumping blood in a pulse, in a wave, typically 80 times a minute. Unless you're exercising, then it might be 100 or 120 times a minute. So your red blood cell only has a fraction of a second to pick up the oxygen. It's going through the lungs, the blood supply to the lungs very quickly. It has to pick up the oxygen. And so only iron can do that. Only iron can snap up the oxygen that quickly. And then it goes through 5 veins to the left side of the heart. The heart pumps the oxygen-rich blood out to the body. Now, that iron is very sensitive, and it can feel when an organ or a tissue or a muscle needs more oxygen. It releases it appropriately. So without iron, you become fatigued and you become exhausted, and you can even develop the most common form of anemia, iron deficiency anemia, which kills over 80,000 people each year. That's how dangerous it could be. So you need iron, but it has to be the right amount of iron. That's why I tell people get an iron panel. But if you're on these drugs, you probably need to take an iron supplement once in a while, especially if you're vegan or vegetarian, because it's hard to absorb the iron in vegetables. So you also need iron to make catalase. Catalase is a very important antioxidant in the human body. It's a master enzyme antioxidant. It protects you from using oxygen for energy. So when you use oxygen and calories for energy, there's always a byproduct, a peroxide. And peroxides kill cells. So the catalase breaks peroxide down to usable oxygen and water. So it's recycling it into something good. And they measure one molecule, one atom of catalase, one molecule of catalase can break down 1 million molecules of hydrogen peroxide. So it's a very useful antioxidant. It's very active in your liver because your liver is controlling your blood sugar, it's controlling your B12, your vitamin D level, your cholesterol levels, hormone levels. It's filtering toxins and bacteria out of your blood, etc. So the liver is prone to damage because it's also the master organ of detoxifying everything in the body, practically. So it's prone to damage. the liver requires a lot of catalase to protect itself. If you lack iron, you're not making catalase, because catalase looks kind of like a whirligig, and iron's right in the middle of it. But you also need iron for your immune system. How do you know you're lacking iron? Look at your palm. And your palm should be reddish. That's the hemoglobin. So if your palm looks yellowish, pale, you probably need some iron. Look at your lips. If your lips are pale, you probably need some iron. If you get on an exercise bike and you're fatigued in 2 minutes, you probably need iron. But also, if you catch every cold coming by, you're probably lacking iron. Because iron's at the core of immune system function, just like zinc is. And it's hard to overload a person with iron. It can be done, but it's not easy because we're so big. But it's very easy to overload a virus with iron. And that's exactly what certain immune cells do. They take iron and they overload. They cause an overdose of iron in the virus, and it dies. So you need iron. It's at the core of immunity. So if you're on those drugs, okay, if you're on Nsaids, Advil, Aleve, aspirin, Celebrex, diclofenac, any of them, you have to pay attention to folate. You have to pay attention to melatonin. You have to pay attention to zinc. And you have to pay attention to iron. So thank you for listening to the Invite Health podcast today. You can find all of our episodes for free wherever you listen to podcasts, or just visit invitehealth.com/podcast. Please make sure you subscribe and leave us a review. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Invite Health. Hope to see you next time on my next episode of the Invite Health podcast, which is going to be about the side effects and toxicity of these Nsaids, and are there useful alternatives, which the answer is yes. And thank you so much for listening. Jerry Hickey signing off. Have a great day.